The crowd inside the Vorax Grand Arena was louder than a storm, the air shaking with the sound of thousands of alien voices all laughing at the same thing. A single human standing alone in the center of the ring, chains were locked around his wrists and ankles, but his head was held high. His name was Kane, and he had been captured during a raid near the outer colonies, the Vorax. Announcer stood high above the pit, his voice booming through the echoing walls as he called Kane the weakest creature in the galaxy. The aliens around him shouted insults, some throwing scraps of metal or food toward the human as if to remind him of his place. Kane did not speak. He simply watched their faces as if memorizing them. Two massive Vorax soldiers stepped forward, dragging an object between them. It was a weapon, a thick curved blade with a solid metal shaft, so heavy that both aliens strained under its weight. The crowd laughed harder when they saw it.
Ow.
They knew their strongest fighters needed to hands just to lift it. The announcer pointed at Kane and declared that if the human could not lift the weapon, he would be thrown to the arena beasts, and if by some miracle he did lift it, he would still have to face the Vorax champion. The challenge was a trap meant to humiliate him. Kane stepped forward calmly, his eyes not leaving the weapon. He reached down, wrapped one hand around the shaft, and paused. The crowd went silent for a second, expecting him to fail. Instead, Kane lifted the weapon. In a single slow motion, his muscles tensed, but his face showed no strain. He held it up for all to see, turning in a slow circle as if he wanted every single alien in the crowd to watch. Then, without warning, he let the weapon drop, and the sound of it striking the arena floor was like thunder. The crowd roared with laughter again, thinking he had given up, but Kane's eyes were on the ground, not the weapon. A thin crack had appeared beneath his feet and was slowly spreading outward. Vorax soldiers looked at each other, unsure if the human had caused it or if it was just the old arena stone shifting. The announcer shouted for the champion to enter, and a massive figure in dark armor stepped forward. The alien was nearly twice Kane's size, carrying a warhammer that glowed faintly with heat. He grinned, showing sharp teeth ready to crush the human before the watching empire. The crowd chanted his name over and over. Kane didn't move. He stood at the center of the spreading crack, his hands loose at his sides. His breathing was slow, steady too. Calm for someone about to be crushed, the champion charged the ground, shaking under each step. But just before the warhammer could strike the crack in the arena floor split wide, with a deafening roar of stone breaking, the champion stumbled as the floor gave way beneath him. Kane moved like lightning, stepping aside with precision while the alien's leg went through the gap. The warhammer hit the ground harmlessly, and the vibration widened. The crowd's laughter died suddenly, replaced by shouts of confusion, and alarm dust rose into the air as the old stone foundation began to crumble. Kane stood at the very edge of the growing hole, his silhouette framed against the light pouring from above. He still said nothing, still didn't run. His eyes scanned the walls, the guards, the gates, as if calculating something in his mind. Two guards rushed forward to grab him, but the stone beneath their feet cracked, again forcing them to retreat. Kane finally looked up at the announcer, high above, and gave a single faint smile. It wasn't the smile of a beaten man, or even a man who had just escaped a fight. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The announcer shouted for more guards to enter, but the ground shook again, this time harder than before. Several sections of the arena floor collapsed entirely, sending chunks of stone into the tunnels below. A cold silence began to spread through the massive crowd as the laughter died in every throat. Kane stepped back toward the shadows cast by the falling dust. His figure blurred for a moment in the haze, then was gone. Guards rushed to the gap but found no trace of him, only the sound of shifting stone and the echo of his footsteps fading somewhere deep below remained. The crowd sat frozen, not knowing whether to cheer or panic. The announcer tried to speak, but his voice cracked, and no words came out for the first time. In the history of the Vorax Grand Arena, a prisoner had not been defeated or executed. Instead, he had simply walked away, leaving nothing behind but a fractured floor and a silence that felt heavier than the weapon he had lifted moments later. Arena doors slammed shut, sealing the confused audience inside, while outside the city an unmarked shadow moved quietly into the night. The Vorax capital woke under an unusual weight that morning. Not the usual hum of ships, not the chatter of markets, but something far stranger: silence. was the kind of silence that made even the air feel heavy. Every news channel in the city replayed the same single image, the cracked floor of the grand arena. The previous night's recording ended abruptly, missing the final moments when Kane vanished. Only one frozen frame had been recovered, a blurry shape that looked like a human silhouette walking into darkness. The announcer from the match had been taken away for questioning, though rumors whispered that he had not stopped shaking since security forces swarmed the lower districts, blocking roads and inspecting ships that were scheduled to leave the planet. They told the public that the human had help from smugglers, but no one truly believed it. Kane had been locked in chains with no allies in the city, yet somehow he had disappeared under the eyes of thousands. The military tightened its patrols, scanning every face in the street's drones. Buzzing low overhead, searching for one man in their command center, officers studied a map of the capital, marking places he could be hiding. Most dismissed him as just a fugitive, to be hunted down quietly. Others, though especially the older veterans, spoke in low voices about humans in the old wars. Humans who could break armies without firing a shot. Kane, meanwhile, was moving through the sleeping veins of the city unseen. He avoided main roads instead, slipping through supply tunnels and forgotten drainage channels. His mind worked like a machine, counting patrol routes, measuring how fast the city's response units could move. Every turn he took brought him closer to the power stations he had already marked from the arena walls. He remembered the layout he had seen from the high stands, how certain streets went dark for a few seconds when the arena's lights surged. Now he understood where the control points were, and he intended to use them by midday. The first blackout hit a small district at the edge of the city. It lasted less than 2 minutes, but it was enough for Kane to test his timing. He knew the Vorax would dismiss it as a technical fault, but they wouldn't laugh when it happened again. The next target came at night when a key industrial sector lost power for nearly 20 minutes. Machines halted, workers stood confused, and the military scrambled to restore order. Kane watched it, all from the shadow of a rooftop, his expression unreadable. The silence from the arena had followed him into the streets, spreading like a slow infection. That night, Kane made his way to an abandoned service building near the river. Inside, he found the one thing he had not expected: an alien soldier waiting for him. The Vorax male was young, his armor scratched and dented, his eyes darting toward the door as if afraid to be seen. He didn't raise his weapon. Instead, he stepped forward slowly and whispered something Kane had not heard from any Vorax before. "Help me leave this planet." Kane's stance didn't change, but his mind sharpened instantly. The soldier introduced himself as Real and explained that not all Vorax supported the Empire's cruelty. Real claimed he had seen enough of Kane's actions to know he was not here to slaughter civilians. He wanted to get out before the war came to their streets. Kane said nothing for a long moment, then finally nodded. Real didn't smile, but his shoulders eased a little together. They studied the map Real had brought with him, marking weak points in the capital's defense grid. Kane listened quietly, committing every detail to memory. Outside the city, slept unaware that the man they had mocked in the arena was now slipping deeper into its heart, and somewhere in the command center, a technician noticed something strange. 3 districts had lost power in less than a day. The officer in charge ordered all units to high alert, but it was already too late. Kane had begun moving again, and the silent cracks in the Vorax Empire were already spreading. High command gathered in a steel-walled chamber deep beneath the Vorax capital. The air was tense, the kind of tension that made voices drop without anyone realizing it. 3 cities had suffered unexplained power failures in less than 40 hours. It was not coincidence, and everyone in the room knew it. The large central display showed grainy footage taken from a street camera in the industrial sector. A shadowed figure could be seen crossing between buildings, something long and heavy slung over one shoulder. It was impossible to confirm, but the shape was disturbingly human. The senior commander's mandibles clicked slowly before he gave the order to double the patrols and deploy. The hunters were not ordinary soldiers. They were specialists trained to find and eliminate threats without leaving a trace. Each was armed with advanced tracking implants and weaponry designed for swift kills. The announcement that they would be used against a single human stirred unease among some of the officers. It wasn't the decision that unsettled them, but the implication: if the Plunters failed, the Vorax would be admitting that their most elite forces could not stop what they had once mocked as the weakest species in the Galaxy, Kane and Rill were on the move again, slipping through the narrow veins of the city. Kane's steps were soundless, his eyes scanning every corner. Every time Rill tried to ask where they were heading, Kane only gave short answers he preferred to let actions explain his intent. Their next target was a military supply depot on the eastern ridge. The depot fed the hunters their ammunition, fuel, and rations. Without it, their pursuit would slow. Kane studied the patrols from a distance, waiting for the moment when the outer sentries changed shifts. Then he moved with speed that startled, sliding past cameras and scaling a wall in seconds inside Kane. Planted small charges in fuel lines and storage tanks, not to kill but to cripple. The explosions would disable the facility without harming the workers. When the first blast lit the night, Kane was already gone. The news of the attack spread faster than the flames burning in the depot. The Vorax capital entered a state of near lockdown. But even then, whispers began to move between soldiers. The human was no longer just an escaped prisoner. He was a shadow that struck where he pleased. And left without a trace, Kane was earning a new name among them. The Breaker, some spoke the word. In fear, others, and something close to respect, Trill revealed more as they moved. He told Kane that the Vorax had always known humans were dangerous. They laughed in public, but their history books told a different truth. Entire fleets had once fallen to human tactics, not brute force. The laughter in the arena had been a shield to hide their fear. Kane listened, but said nothing. He had no interest in their history lessons, only in the fact that the Vorax were planning to expand their attacks. 2 human colonies. Rill swore the plan was real. It made Kane's next moves urgent. The hunters closed in faster than Kane expected. One night, as they crossed the shadowed ruins of an old freight yard, a figure stepped out from between 2 containers. Its armor was darker than the shadows, its helmet glowing faintly in the dim light. Kane stopped. Rill froze. The hunter raised no weapon yet. Instead, it stepped forward in perfect silence, studying Kane with an unreadable posture, then without warning. It moved a blur of precision and speed. Kane met the attack head-on. The fight was fast, vicious, the sound of metal striking stone ringing through the yard in less than 20 seconds. The hunter was on the ground, unmoving. Kane hadn't broken single bone or left a single wound, but the alien's face beneath the helmet was locked in a frozen expression of pure terror. Kane stood over the fallen hunter for only a moment before stepping away. Rill followed. Without a word, they both knew the Vorax command would receive the body within hours, and they both knew the silence that followed would not be the same as before. This silence would carry fear through every level of the Empire. Kane had drawn blood without spilling it, and that was far more dangerous than any weapon. An emergency signal pulsed through the Vorax fleet just after dawn. The transmission came from a battleship orbiting a mining colony on the Empire's edge. The voice on the channel was distorted by static words breaking apart into fragments, but one word cut through the interference over and over: human, human, human. Then the signal ended with a low mechanical tone, and nothing more. The battleship's status light on the fleet's command board went dark moments later. The other ships in orbit reported seeing it drifting without power in the capital. The incident was treated as a direct act of war. Military officials ordered an immediate hunt for Kane, doubling the number of hunters and authorizing lethal force in every encounter. The public was told nothing about the word repeated in that final message, but soldiers heard it anyway, and rumors spread faster than the official statements. Kane's shadow was stretching beyond the capital, now touching the far edges of the Empire. Kane was moving faster than before. Rill had given him routes to the outer defense zones, and he was dismantling them one by one. It's not with bombs or mass killings, but with precision strikes. He took out key weapons depots, sabotaged transport hubs, and cut into communication lines. The Vorax military could no longer coordinate without running into delays, confusion, and sometimes total silence. Still, Kane avoided civilians wherever possible, and even Rill was beginning to wonder how far he planned to go. One night, Kane and Rill watched from a ridge overlooking a convoy of warships preparing for launch. The air was heavy with the low hum of their engines. Kane studied the ships for several minutes before shaking his head and moving away. When Riel asked why he didn't strike, Kane finally spoke more than a few words. If we cut them here, they'll blame it on sabotage by their own citizens. Fear will do the rest. It wasn't destruction Kane wanted. It was collapse from the inside out. But the Vorax were not slowing down in their high command chambers. The Emperor himself had begun issuing orders personally. His eyes glowed cold in the dim light of the war table. His final command was simple: bring me the human dead, or alive preferably. Dead, the order reached the ears of every hunter, every soldier, and every officer in the Empire. Chase was no longer just an operation, it was personal. Kane anticipated the tightening net, and instead of fleeing, he turned toward the center of it. His next move was aimed at the largest communication hub in the capital. The hub controlled military transmissions for half the Empire, and if Kane took it, the Vorax command structure would shatter. Rill warned him the place was crawling with guards. But Kane's only response was a quiet "we'll be inside before they know we're nearby." The time the Vorax learned where he was heading, it was already too late. The outer gates of the hub were found open without signs of a break. The guards inside reported hearing nothing unusual until their systems went down one by one. On the security feed, the last thing recorded was a faint human outline passing through a corridor. Then the screens went black, and the hub fell silent in the same wavy battleship had gone silent, orbiting the mining colony. Kane was inside, and the Vorax had no idea what would happen next. Across the Vorax Empire, every public screen flickered without warning. At first, citizens thought it was another blackout, but then an image appeared, Kane standing in the center of the frame. His face shadowed, his voice steady and calm. "You thought strength was about muscle, now you will learn. It is about will." The message was short, but it carried across every city, every outpost, and every ship under Vorax control. For a moment, the Empire stood still in the capital. The broadcast was a direct strike against the Emperor's authority. Military channels flooded with urgent orders to trace the signal, but technicians reported something they had never seen before. Kane had not hacked into the system from outside. He had activated the transmission. From within the main network core itself, no one knew how he had gotten there, and no one could explain how he had bypassed the locked levels of clearance. Even more troubling was what followed within hours. Protests erupted in several cities. Citizens shouted for answers, others called for the Emperor to resign. Soldiers were dispatched to contain the unrest. But more than once they were met with civilians forming walls between Kane's rumored locations and the advancing troops. Kane was no longer just a fugitive, he was a symbol. The breaker was not merely dismantling military strength, he was breaking the idea that the Vorax were untouchable. As riots grew, Kane moved quietly through the capital, using the chaos as cover. Rill stayed close, guiding him through the most dangerous streets. Their target was now the Emperor's main palace, the most heavily guarded structure in the city. The palace gates were made of armored alloy, its walls layered with shielding. Kane studied them from a nearby rooftop, then turned to Rill. "The front is for shows we go, where they think no one will." Kane's voice was steady, his eyes cold. They entered through an old drainage channel that Rill swore had been sealed decades ago. The path was narrow, filled with stale air and coated in dust. The tunnel ended behind the palace gardens, where two guards stood watch. Kane moved before they could raise an alarm. Striking both with precise blows that left them unconscious, he stepped into the garden's shadow. The massive towers of the palace rising over him. The riot outside was growing louder, a low roar carrying through the night inside. The palace corridors were empty, the usual guards pulled away to help control the streets. Kane moved quickly, knowing the Emperor might already be preparing an escape. Rill guided him toward the throne room, a vast chamber of dark stone and banners. Kane pushed the doors open slowly, expecting an armed guard, or perhaps the Emperor himself. Instead, the room was silent. The throne stood at the far end, but it was empty. The only thing there was a folded piece of metal resting on the seat. Kane crossed the chamber and picked it up. It was a message etched in sharp letters. "We knew you would come." Kane stood still for a long moment, reading the words again. Rill's voice was low behind him. "They're gone." Kane said nothing, but his eyes told the truth. He had reached the heart of the Empire only to find it already abandoned, and somewhere out there the Emperor was watching, waiting for his next move. The Vorax homeworld lay under a sky that felt heavier than stone. The streets that once rang with the constant hum of machines and the noise of trade were now still. No ships moved in the air, no voices called out from the markets. Towers that once glowed with bright lights stood dark, as if the city itself had stopped breathing. Kane walked alone through the Capitol Square, his boots echoing against the empty stone. He passed overturned stalls, abandoned vehicles, and banners that fluttered. Weakly in the wind above him, the palace loomed silent, its gates wide open, but no guards at their posts. Rill emerged from one of the side streets. His armor gone, replaced by simple cloth, the alien's face was lined with exhaustion, but there was a strange calm in his voice when he spoke. The Emperor took the fleet and left the people here. No one knows where they went. Kane looked at him without surprise. He had expected the Emperor to flee, but not to leave the heart of his empire so completely. Exposed around them, small groups of citizens began to gather, watching the human who had shattered their world. None came close, but none shouted. Either their faces showed fear, but also something else. Curiosity, and perhaps even respect in the days that followed. Kane did not leave. Instead, he helped Rill and a small group of willing Voraks dismantle what remained of the Empire's war machine. Weapon stockpiles were destroyed, military databases erased, and command centers stripped of their control systems. Ships that had once carried war fleets were grounded, their engines permanently disabled. The Voraks would no longer have the means to launch campaigns across the stars. Word of the silent capital spread quickly through the galaxy. Other worlds watched with a mix of relief and caution. Messages from distant colonies carried the same question. Is it over? Kane never answered directly. Instead, he moved from site to site, ensuring no hidden arsenals or secret command posts remained. By the end of the week, the once mighty Vorax Empire was reduced to a scattering of ships and frightened officials hiding far from their former throne world. One evening, as the last of the weapons depots burned, Kane stood with Rill at the edge of the capital. The alien glanced at him. You're leaving, aren't you? Kane gave the faintest nod without looking away from the horizon. He walked toward the city's outer gates, and by morning he was gone. No one saw how he left the planet or where. He went only days later did Vorak scouts find something unusual in orbit, a small human-made beacon floating in the cold dark. It flashed a single repeating message across all channels: don't test Earth again. The beacon's signal carried far beyond the Vorak system, and wherever it reached, silence followed.